Hello and welcome. My guest today is Andrij Dobriansky, Director of Communication at the Ukrainian Congress Committee of America. Andrij, thank you so much for joining us.
And thank you for having me.
Let's start with what everyone watching right now. The key question is, will Putin and Zelensky actually meet in Turkey? Russia keeps dogging that question.
Yes, I think that's, from international perspective, interesting because we haven't seen Putin willing to travel somewhere to meet. So the number one question is, would Putin be even willing to leave the country to have a meeting? If he does leave the meeting, will he fly over the war zone that is Ukraine? Will he take a round circle around Ukraine, and what will that reaction be to him afraid of the own war that he started? And then finally, if he finally does make it to Turkey, what kind of reception will he get locally? All of this leads us to believe that he probably will not, just based on this history. There are some people in the United States on the Republican side who simply follow the lead of President Trump, who is saying because President Trump says that Putin will definitely meet, they believe that he will definitely meet. But I think many people in the world and in the United States who look at international affairs are more skeptical.
And building on that, delegation were supposed to meet in Turkey, but Zelensky raised the stakes and openly called on Putin to come in person. Would you call that a strong move?
Absolutely. Again, this is not somebody, Putin, who's been willing to have direct communication on this. He has always pushed this onto other people, whether it's diplomatic talks with his cabinet ministers for any kind of allegations of war crimes. He says, that's not me, that's not my orders, those are private contractors you were talking about. It is time for Putin to own this war. And the first step will be face-to-face negotiations. And I have no doubt that President Zelensky will raise the war crimes if he's ever seated face-to-face with President Putin, knowing that eventually President Putin will have to come account for the war crimes that he committed.
If that meeting does happen, how do you think it would play out? Would a face-to-face photo of Zelensky and Putin legitimize Putin and his crimes, or could it somehow be a win for Ukraine?
I think the win for Ukraine is obviously raising the stakes and calling Putin to participate directly. If and when, and it's very unlikely, but if and when Putin comes to sit at a table, I think it's also very unlikely that he would come alone. We have seen this with every negotiation. He comes with a team. Even in an informal conversation with President Trump, he'll bring a team with him. So what would happen if President Zelensky and President Putin were in a room together? There might be a lot of conversation. But in the end, without a formal diplomatic process, there's nothing to come of it if it's just two people alone in the room. So without a diplomatic track, without a framework of how we even begin a negotiation, I think most of this would be bluster. So I see this as Putin proposing something. Ukraine rightfully calling Russia out on this, and if and when it were to come to fruition, it would be upon them to show a dramatic result. But I don't think anything can be productive out of a meeting like this without even the beginnings of a framework diplomatic agreement.
And now shifting to Trump's role in all this, he first supported the idea of a ceasefire, but after Russia proposed talks in Turkey, he suddenly started pressuring Ukraine. Why such a sharp change in tone?
This is the problem with President Trump. He is very quick to react. He wants to be the first to react to any kind of development, domestic or international. This happened most poignantly during these negotiations just in the last several weeks, when Russia proposed to have dialogue directly with the United States in Saudi Arabia. Not only was this a break from the past where the United States was refusing to have direct conversations with Russia, but the specific reason they were refusing was that you needed to wait for a ceasefire to be declared before having a conversation. But President Trump did not talk to his staff, did not talk to his advisors, and simply looked at this proposal as a new way for him to be the first one to have a diplomatic, or not him directly, but his minister, as well as the Minister of Foreign Affairs for Russia, to have direct conversations. This was not done in line with any European partner, any other worldwide partner, and certainly not with consultation with Ukraine or even the presidential national security staff. So much in the same way, he reacted to the news that Putin had a proposal, Ukraine proposed where and when to do this, and instead of conferring with his international partners so that we're all working together, like the coalition came together in Kyiv over the weekend, described how we can work together, then presented the plan to President Trump. President Trump, once again, forgot to check in with his advisors or his other countries in the alliance, and then went ahead.
Meanwhile, pressure is also coming from Europe. Macron and other EU leaders said Russia has until Monday evening to accept a joint US-EU proposal for a full 30-day ceasefire. Do you think Russia will accept that offer?
I think they would only accept if they were going to go ahead and have a conversation, and Putin would be flying to Turkey for that conversation. Again, I don't even think he's. We know how paranoid President Putin is, not least of which because he has ordered so many assassinations, including several assassination attempts against President Zelensky. But he certainly wouldn't be comfortable flying over Ukraine, even in a peacetime situation, after all the war crimes committed. In this case, I think he would want to have an official policy of no drones, no missiles, no anything firing, so that he can fly out of the country. So if there is a ceasefire, I think it only bodes well to have a conversation. If there is no ceasefire, I don't really see how a conversation takes place this week.
And one more angle, what about the allies? Is the pressure from the so-called coalition of the willing still working on Putin, or is that starting to fade?
No, if anything, it's coming together much more powerfully than it had in previous months and years. We see Europe standing together, Europe standing united, Europe finally listening to the frontline countries. We see the policy changes that are happening in the Baltics and Poland radically in terms of their willingness to deploy landmines at their border, the number of drills and military readiness that need to happen. We obviously know what's been happening in Finland for years, worried about this kind of incursion. This is a very real threat, and I believe that now we're seeing, with the actions of the so-called coalition, the willing, we finally see Western European leaders and the more wealthy countries, frankly, finally willing to respond in an organized fashion. Once you have them both traveling to Ukraine, declaring this unified strategy of support, it's only then that a whole strategy can start being changed on the local level in terms of arms manufacturing, in terms of additional support to Ukraine and borderline countries with Russia.
Okay, and one more. Do you think? Don't you think sanction doesn't really scare Putin anymore?
Sorry, what doesn't scare Putin?
Sanction. About European sanction. Yeah.
Sanctions are never supposed to be an end to the war. They are just one part of a coordinated attack. Very similarly, this was the struggle in the former Yugoslavia in the 1990s, as well as the campaign in Syria and Libya, where there was a lot of political blowback to actually sending in ground troops. So for an extended period of time in many of those conflicts, it was simply an air war coordinated by NATO allies, and that extended the period. Same here. Many more tools could have been used against President Putin, but because of there was a lack of political appetite to do anything beyond sanctions, especially after the annexation of Crimea, especially in the first few months of the war of 2022, we did not get, very quickly to cutting off of the SWIFT system. We did not get very quickly to various different means of cutting off Russia. One notable exception to the sanctions is the fact that Russia and the United States are still very active partners in the realm of space, and even signed a new deal in 2023 to extend their partnership of sending astronauts and cosmonauts to space together. So there are still many ways where Russia can be cut out of the international system for a variety of factors. But one thing to underline is that sanctions can still be increased, but they should never be done just by themselves. There are numerous other ways to inflict pain on Russia that the United States hasn't used so far.
And let's move on the bigger geopolitical picture. We are clearly seeing a thaw in US-China relations, and the markets are reacting. But the key question is, did Trump manage to get Xi to pressure Putin? Right after Xi came back from Moscow, Putin suddenly proposed a truce. And now Trump is easing up on China. What it means?
In terms of the conversations that happened in Geneva over the 10th and 12th of May, the news is still very fresh. The only confirmation of national security and discussions that were had were about the supply of illicit drugs to the United States and throughout the world, the chemical precursors to fentanyl. Beyond that, we haven't heard much of a military conversation being done in terms of aiding Russia or other terrorist states around the world by the Chinese Republic. I believe that President Trump also wasn't personally involved in any of these discussions. He today very recently announced that he plans to have a conversation with President Xi by the end of this week. So we will see what any conversations are to be had about China's support of Russia. We obviously saw the show of support by Xi publicly being in Russia for May 9th. But beyond that, we know that Russia has been more reliant on partners such as Iran and North Korea for support. And China has basically been trying to gain as much information from the war against Ukraine and the kind of NATO weapons that they use. As far as further supplying them, it remains a question going forward if that's something that the United States can actually get a firm commitment from the Chinese Republic.
And let's talk trade for a moment. What's the current state of the trade war? Is the tension starting to ease?
We don't really know. We know that there was an announcement out of Geneva and amplified by President Trump. President Trump, before the announcement in Geneva, said that he thinks that the 145% tariffs will be cut down to 80%. It seems that they've been cut down to 45%. This is the United States tariffs against Chinese goods. Still, a big sum of tariffs are related to the export of those chemicals I mentioned about fentanyl. So there are a number of factors involved in why the tariffs still exist. We did see an enormous bounce back in the market in pre-trading today, still very high up. However, from a high of some 45,000, well, the U.S. stock market dropped 10,000 points since the so-called Liberation Day, and it has slowly been crawling back in fits and spurts. This is a 1,000-point jump today. There was a 1,000-point jump a couple of weeks ago. Unfortunately for the United States, and the worldwide economy, these kind of rapidly shifting numbers and policies don't help with international trade. The biggest problem for the United States is a lot of trade takes time to have deals locked in, and then the after effects of those deals. And we are just about ready to see an enormous amount of shipments stopped to the United States because they were canceled as soon as Liberation Day, which is April 2nd, and the tariffs being announced around the world. So since April 2nd, an enormous amount of deliveries have been canceled to the United States, specifically from China, but also other countries, not understanding when tariffs would be put on or not. And so because a lot of ocean liners take time, with the cargo ships take time to come here. We are just now coming to the period of the calendar where those ships that were canceled at the beginning of April now would have been arriving, but now there are no ships. Because there are no ships arriving, there are no trucks coming from the middle of the country to pick them up, which means there are no goods being sold from the middle of the country to the West Coast or the East Coast, and therefore none of the after effects of the trucks picking up goods and bringing them to the middle of the country. So these are after effects that we are still going to feel in the United States economy, probably until the end of summer, even if by the end of this week, we have a resuming of a trade deal with China.
And looking at the broader strategy, could it be that Trump outplay everyone? And once this artificial crisis blows over, the US could come out even stronger?
Everything is possible, but I think what the Trump administration and President Trump is realizing more and more is that his advantage of coming out at the very beginning and trying to be the strongest player and the most aggressive is rapidly consolidating the forces against him. China is definitely pushing back. They pushed back in 2020. They did not agree to his proposed deal back then, and only offered him a very small deal after he had to spend billions of dollars to bail out American farmers that were losing money because of his trade war with China back in his first administration. And now, even with these negotiations now, China is still in a much more advantageous position to make the United States suffer. I think we'll probably see goods, like I mentioned, with the ships not arriving, a lack of goods in the United States, and an outrage by American consumers before China settles anything and signs any agreement. China would like to put some pressure on that way. And we haven't even come to Europe. Europe is the major player here. Trump decided that he wanted to pick a fight with European countries in terms of tariffs. To have the number one and number two economies, China and the United States, fight is one thing. But now to pick a fight as well with Europe, and he hasn't even started the real tariff war, because we know that both the United States and the EU have paused tariffs for 90 days. We haven't seen or heard any kind of negotiation to alleviate that. And so in the next 45 days or so, we might have very high tariffs between Europe and the United States, causing yet another market crash later this summer.
And finally, again, about public opinion, what are ordinary Americans saying about all this? The trade war hit them hard. Are they still willing to wait it out and stay patient?
Overall, the polls are quite horrible for this issue for President Trump. But if you look at the breakdown of the polls, the respondents who are Republicans are still extraordinarily positive and sticking with the president's policies. Specifically on the trade war, those willing to put up with higher prices, I think Republicans, between 65 and 75% of Republicans are willing, depending on which poll, are willing to pay higher prices in stores due to inflation in support of President Trump's policy. Now, how long that will last, I don't know. It's one thing to say that before you feel that. You also have, at the same time as prices are being raised for goods, whether you're talking about fresh food being delivered from overseas, coffee, etc. At the same time as that, we're also having a very rare time where fuel prices are dropping to historic lows. So that's one thing that's alleviating people's pocketbooks. But I think the longer this goes on, the less they'll be supportive.
My guest today, Andrij Dobriansky. I really appreciate it. Andrij, thanks for being here, and talk soon.
Absolutely. Thank you.